Hey everyone. So Johnny Chainsaw and I made our first podcast, and we found this app called Anchor. It was really easy. Once we found it, it really brought things together. So you can record and edit your podcast right from your phone or from your computer. You can hear it on Spotify, Apple, a bunch of other places. It really is kind of everything that you need in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hey Galaxy, this is a podcast of Johnny Chainsaw and AZPotato, and we have a return guest today. Inchoate, who was on before, really high level player with some extremely powerful ships, and you know, the topic of the day right now is server mergers, among other things. And we wanted to reconnect with Inchoate and get his thoughts on it. So, Inchoate, how you been doing, man?
Been doing fine, playing the game like everybody else, and not enjoying many of the events that have come out, just like everybody else.
So these new events that you've seen, they seem to lean towards you've got to be part of a big alliance with a lot of active players, or you're just not gonna be able to compete at all. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's definitely true. The kind of the gearing of it. Number one, activity has always been important, regardless. They have at least made some effort, within a number of the events that they have to have scaling of them. So you're playing basically against players around your own level and power for the certain amount of tokens or credits or whatever have you that apply to your alliance totals. So there has been some effort in that direction. But obviously, if you have an alliance of 70 members and only 10 of them play a day, you're definitely not going to be competitive.
So if you're in one of the kind of public alliances, that you see initially in the game, you're in a solo alliance, you're just sort of out of the mix, right? You can't compete for the bigger benefits unless you're part of a large active alliance. Is that kind of your thought?
In most cases, I would say 75% of the of the events that come up, there are obviously the solo ones, which you can perform solo for obvious reasons, but the vast majority of them, when it comes to requiring a certain number of players to play, if it's, for example, some of the events where you complete your objectives and your alliance gets a set number of points for it, and that's all that you can do, then you can only do that much, and it's directly comparable to the activity of your alliance.
So is that for you personally, right? As a extremely active player in the game, is it frustrating when you see members of your own alliance who are I'm just going to say it simply, they're kind of glomming on to the benefits of the effort you put in? Or are you looking at, look, this guy really put in the effort and did 100% of what he or she could do?
Well, from my perspective, because the alliance that I'm a part of is newer, we actually have an extremely active player base. And we also have ways of keeping records of who contributes and who is active. So players who become inactive or whatever are told, warned, questioned, try to hit them up on Discord. And if they've decided they're not playing the game or they need to take a break, we do have some turnover. So for our alliance of 80 players, for any given event, we'll see 75 of them have participated in that event.
Well, 75 out of 80 is you got to respect that level of activity. But you have a lot of alliances out there that have, a capacity of 60 or 65 that have 20 active players. What do they need to do differently to be able to compete effectively in events without just hanging on to kind of some dead wood, honestly?
I think from, and this is obviously goes down a different road for a topic, but, the alliance management, an important part of it is aligning with people that have similar play styles and goals and objectives, and obviously, qualities and character. So, I originally formed my alliance with other players from a separate alliance because we were of those mindsets. We are similar play style. We were interested in later game play, and we're all very active. So as such, we've kind of attracted that kind of person. If you're not going to be very active, it's going to be harder to be competitive for obvious reasons. But in all reality, you probably are going to be better off in alliance with people who are along your same play styles, because the synergy of an alliance, in my opinion, is more important.
And I agree with you. And that actually leads us into kind of the topic that's on the front of everyone's mind right now, right? And that's this whole notion, and let's call it a confirmed rumor of server mergers, and what that means to dynamics from a society level and dynamics from an alliance level, and how does it change the game for us? And do you believe the rumors?
Well, the rumors have been confirmed by Scopely that it's going to happen. So whether or not I would consider it no longer a rumor, but like you said, something that's been confirmed. I think a lot of it has to do with a lot of the confusion is the simple fact that there's not much information given out. One of the things I think Scopely is very bad at is publishing things that are coming up, thoughts that they're doing, anything like that. Like you'll see in a lot of games, there's a test server, there are things that are being tested currently, and they actually give you a very functional list. So at least you have some information. The way this game is you turn it on one day and you didn't even know they changed something. All of a sudden it's different.
Doesn't that make it fun? A little.
Some of it is at least interesting, but some of it I think is a little underhanded, because you'll frequently get a lot of comments that, such and such is working, and this officer is doing what it's supposed to do, and then you turn it on the next day and now it's doing something different, or you have an officer that is actually not doing what it says in its tooltip. That in my opinion, because a lot of what later play is really trying to figure out best combinations of officers and things like that. It makes it a little frustrating when you're not at least told that it was changed.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that, but I'm gonna play the advocate here, right? So is there a tendency out there of whatever the game developers do out of the gate, whatever changes is negative, and is that because it's bad, or is that because the player base is kind of anti-change?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. I think if it was very out in the open of what's changing, and even if it was after the fact, I think it would be a little bit better received. But some of the changes happen where, for example, the recent changes that they had with the home system survey ships, where they brought them all down from 55, they added some in that are now kinetic weapons rather than energy weapons. They did that in response to basically poor coding on their part, where they advanced into deep space and they opened it up and had ships that now you could actually fight those. Those were never meant to be killable, is my impression from the developers.
Yeah.
And people were in there and farming the stink out of them and getting blueprints. So
Well, you and I both got the benefit of that until they changed it, right? So lucky for us, we were a little bit ahead of the curve.
Right. Well,
right?
I got it in about midway. There were earlier on in the year, like in January, the drop rates were significantly higher. You could get double drops in the whole 9 yards. So some people made out like bandits, and then some people utilized it while it was still functional. And nowadays, I mean, I still typically actually farm there just because it's either that or it's go to a system where you get no blueprint whatsoever. So it's just harder to do. I go from killing 20 at a time to 8 at a time, but those kind of changes when they come out.
And along the way, and honestly, the flight times, right? The warp times are 3 minutes versus 18 minutes, right? And it's sort of, what kind of attention do you want to pay to go farming level 49s versus 55s?
Exactly. So when they look at the overall gameplay, they've decided that was a bad thing. At least it was made, that particularly was at least announced, again, after the fact, but at least it was put basically in black and white, so to speak, on their Discord. But for example, when you have officers that get changed, so maybe a tooltip that says it does shield piercing, but it actually does armor piercing if you actually test it. And then another day you can see that they get changed or they get buffed or, tweaked with, and there's no announcement about it, does make it harder to find, those really good officer combinations for some unusual scenarios. Like take, for example, if you didn't understand during this Borg, the Mega Cube portion of the Borg event, if you didn't realize that certain nodes on that Borg cube were more effective against your interceptor or your battleship, you're not going to be as effective in the event. That's not printed anywhere. It's not told to anyone. You have to actually read all the way down into the description of the node to find out what it is, because it still appears as an armada on the triangle. So these little subtleties, if they're explained a little bit better, I think would help everybody's play rather than just the people who are overly active and have the time to call through discords and things like that to find out these little nuances.
No, and that's an interesting point. So when you're looking at kind of the Mega Cube event, are you changing ships and officer crew based on the specific node you're hitting? And is this alliance versus alliance kind of event for points, or is this, in your opinion, kind of a server level, we have to knock this stuff out because there's some bigger goal as a server that we all get at the end?
I think it would have been much more interesting if it had been the latter. I think the way that it's currently set up, it's basically it is a partially an individual event, obviously. The rewards are, something to be argued about later, but okay, I get a neat little frame or something like that. Gee whiz, that's great. But then you have the second category, which are your alliance points and the alliance leaderboard. The leaderboard is basically a measure of activity, and also you get bonuses for people that spend. So it's very individualized to the alliance and then to the individual within that alliance. I think had it been planned out a little bit better, having the individual nodes, for example, once you kill them, they stay dead. And if you make it all the way around all 10 of them, that there's at least a cinematic, some type of finality to it or interesting event, even that would be something different rather than, I'm just clicking on something else to hit it. So our alliance, everything up through the epics was easy to kill. In the super cube, basically, yes, those nodes are a lot harder to kill. We did some playing around with different captain layouts, and certain ships would run certain ones and make them much more killable. But in the end, not really beneficial. It's kind of a exercise in, being a geek, of figuring out what's the easiest way to kill something. Rather than that, you can just brute force it and just bash on it all you want.
Yeah, and it's more about multiple times hitting it, and eventually you just pound through it. But you're right; they come back, right? It's not a total server event where once that node is gone on this 3 system, 10 nodes per system, 30 total, that the server comes together and eliminates them all. But and that's kind of the point of this podcast is, you've been at battle, right? There's all these alliances and non-aggression pacts and long-term history over 18 months with other alliances, and suddenly we're gonna come together, right? Somehow there's going to be this server merger, and we don't know what that looks like, right? What, like the server you're on, 34, is going to get merged potentially with someone else. What does that mean? Like what scares you about?
Well, I mean, obviously the biggest concern for people are, what server are you merging with? If my server merges with 17, where now I've got a number of level 50 players who, have tier 4 epic ships, that all of a sudden is going to be a significant change in where you basically sit on the food chain in your server. On the flip side, if they merge you with a server that, they have their top players are lower, and maybe they only have even just 1 or 2 even tier 1 uncommon G4 ships, that's different. So I think that's everybody's biggest question, is you have to wonder what type of server you're going to merge with from a power player perspective, but also what's the general mentality of the server. Is it a server that has leaned and kind of organically grown into an ROE respecting server, versus a server where it's basically piracy all the time? Those type of gameplay differences are going to have a vast effect on how it affects your gameplay with a merger.
So how do you feel like you, in your gameplay style, you influence that, right? Regardless of, who enters the game. So let's say your server merges with 17, right? With a lot of high level players. Do you feel like you're done, or do you feel like you're like, thank God I can finally know these guys and learn from them? Mm-hmm. Or is it just give up because I can't compete?
Well, I mean, obviously that's yet to be seen, because you kind of have to play the hand you're dealt, and I haven't been dealt the cards yet. There have been obviously several times, like many people that have played this game for a while, thoughts about, should I keep going? Should I keep playing this? I do take breaks. I do play other things, like everybody else, plenty of Netflix recently, but it'll kind of bear out when it bears out.
Okay, so kind of on that note, are you panicked over this? Is this something, this whole server merger conversation, rumor, discussion, does this freak you out, or are you just kind of go with the flow? It takes a lot
more than something like this to freak me out. This is something that's basically a blip on the radar. There have been plenty of changes that I have not agreed with. This basically, you can just add to the list of changes, and unfortunately, most of what I've seen has been pushed in a more negative direction. This in particular, at least I have a little bit of heads up that it's happening, even though I don't know exactly what that means, because the rest of the information is so spotty. But we'll cross this bridge when we come to it.
So are you just gut feel? Are you looking forward to the opportunity of the change, or are you more concerned about the negative effect of the change?
My biggest thought is just why. Like, what is the purpose of doing this? Because I think it's going to be difficult for anybody to predict whether it is going to be a positive or a negative. My gut tells me that it's going to go in one of those directions. But part of those, I don't think it's just going to maintain the status quo and give you a larger player base. I think it is going to be either a positive or a negative. It's going to be a binary change to people's gameplay. But because there's no defined characteristics to what they're doing in the merge, are they merging systems that are servers that are very similar in power? Are they going to pair it off lower and higher? Is there going to be a mix of things? I mean, there's so many different combinations, it's very difficult to predict.
Well, so, you, as you know, you have access to some VIP kind of groups, right? Where there's some discussion about this. Have you seen anything definitive that indicates, your happiness or your comfort in the direction it's going or not? Or is it really closed even to the highest level players in some of those VIP Discord channels?
That flow of information is still very closed. It basically, at least is a community of people that do have a higher level of play and obviously a higher level of purchasing. So at least some of those issues that we come up with, if you need to know how to best play your Sally, that's a lot different than, where do I go farm with my Newton? I mean, those kind of play styles are just a little bit different. And there are people that are above me playing with tribunes, for example, and I have only 400 million away from getting one of those, for God's sake. So there are different play styles still, but those play styles and gaming experiences at least are a more common theme for us to talk amongst ourselves. But our interaction with official information only comes from basically a singular source, and it's very, very spotty.
Yeah, so I'm on, if you're not aware, right, I'm the strongest player on server 22. And I'm nowhere even close to that on my alternate account on server 34 where you're at, right? But at some level, it terrifies me that 22 and 34 would merge, because I would be, like number 10 or 12 or somewhere in that neighborhood, and couldn't even compete with the ships you have on server 34. But what comes across to you as, man, I really don't want to merge with that server. On the other hand, if you merge with server 22, you couldn't even hit my ships, right? I mean, you could hit my main, but my other one is 28. You couldn't even hit it at your level. So what's the impact to your gameplay style on this server merge? Like, what are you thinking? Are you looking for opportunity, or are you looking for blah, 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 there's a bunch of new names?
I mean, I think from my perspective, it probably will not have a significant impact just on my particular gameplay. I mean, even though at this level, mining isn't really even helpful, to be quite honest. We all do it because we're used to do it, because it helps when you're on G3s. G4 materials are much less important. But for example, if I'm merged with a server where piracy is common, and there are higher level players that go and can hit my miners in warp 120, then that might just be annoying, but it's not really going to affect my gameplay, because it doesn't really matter, to be quite honest. But For players that are in the mid levels, players that are in the 30s, and even in the 20s, all of a sudden, if we have a massive influx of people, I mean, those G3 nodes are already very scarce for people. They have miners lined up after miners in order to, flip nodes. So if you double the population base with only that many nodes available, I do think it'll definitely raise tensions and conflicts. But at the higher levels, I don't think nearly as much so.
So speaking of kind of that mid level, right, in the mid 30s, what's the impact overall if you somehow double the number of active players looking for nodes? Is this an intentional kind of create a PvP event, or is this a different intent?
Well,
what are your thoughts on
like
that?
I was kind of saying in the beginning, the biggest question of why is server merger happening is, that's one of the potential answers, that somebody at Scopely thought, we really wanted a PvP game. A lot of servers have not been very PvP heavy. If we merge servers, now we're going to basically, take some of the resources that people have kind of become accustomed to a way to get. That's going to cause conflict. And if people are in conflict, then they're going to spend money in order to buy packs and get better ships and more stuff for their ships and tier them up, et cetera, et cetera. My personal feeling is that's likely the decision base for this merger.
So you've heard my previous podcast before, and you've been a guest on it before, and appreciated. So Johnny Chainsaw, who's my counterpart on these podcasts, he's a minor killer, right? I mean, he is a non-ROE, go run around, just cause mayhem everywhere. And he's really good at it. Is that what you see kind of in the future of these server mergers? Is a number of people who either have already played that way, or it's an opportunity for somebody to change the way they play, given the new kind of
I think it'll probably create more of it. And I think that'll come from two reasons. Number one, like we've discussed, is going to be the scarcity of nodes. People are going to get frustrated and just start system clearing. And then in the end, some of the nodes will stay open and they can mine for a while. And on the flip side, some people are just going to become more frustrated with the idea of mining and just say, well, I can't get my mats that way, or I keep getting knocked off nodes. I might as well just enjoy the game by becoming a node clearer. If that blows your kilt up, I mean, whatever. But I think it's going to increase.
So do you think, just conceptually, right? Because we don't have any detail, really. Server mergers are going to be a good thing for the game in general, for its longevity, or it's going to cause people to just quit?
I think it'll probably have a bit of effect on both. There's going to be people who are going to take it and basically use it as a kind of a spark to increase their power and size and whatnot, to try to basically get away from that level of play. And there's going to be a number of people who it's going to frustrate and it's going to cause them to quit. Those players are probably not the players that are spending as much money. So in the end, seeing as I think this is more of a money grab, I think it probably is going to have some positive effect for the financial bottom line, at least in the short term. It would be interesting to see, in my opinion, what it really does for players that are potentially new to the game coming into games that are already very saturated.
So what scares you about server mergers? What are you concerned about, and what are you looking
obviously,
forward to?
Shaking it up a bit is just interesting, from my perspective. I don't know whether it'll be expressly positive or negative from my perspective, My biggest concern is that I don't know that this is really a strong positive move to increase the longevity of the game, to promote new players playing. And, I think that hurts the long-term play of the game itself.
Potentially, right? And that's a concern because without going into detail, and I'm not going there, you've spent some money on the game, and you're an extremely powerful player. And most servers would be frightened to have you merge with them, including me, by the way. But I've spent money on the game also, right? What happens if this thing dies in 6 months, right?
I mean, overall, from just the perspective of, I still enjoy the game and I enjoy the people that I play with personally. Again, as I said in your previous podcast, that's really the reason that I still play the game, are the group of players that I play with. I definitely am concerned that, potentially that they will be more affected by this than I would, and it may cause some of them to leave, which would lessen my desire to be in the game myself. That I think is my chief concern. But in the same token, I don't think you have to worry about merging. If we merge together, I'm actually a pretty nice guy.
Well, you sound like one, right? Even though, your reputation is you're just brutal in the game.
If people get, in the way of one of my ships, then yeah, if it's a higher power, it's going to have a higher effect. But I'm not a system clearer. I actually don't seek out conflict. And for the most part, I'm a very passive player.
So I'm going to ask you kind of a rudimentary question here. You're a new player, there's a new player coming into the game. What's your best advice for a new player, right? Somebody who's made it to they've gone through the first events and they made it to level 10. What should they do to get where you are? Because I mean, you're maybe one of the most powerful players.
Much more power, but for the younger player, it really is decide if the game style and the way that the game plays with you. Like, do you like the fact, obviously it's available on your phone. Many people can play around with it at work, etc. It makes it more convenient from that perspective. They have to decide if they enjoy that. And then, as we previously discussed, they have to decide what type of player they're going to be from a financial perspective. If they want to occasionally get a pack, make that decision early. If you know that you want to accelerate your play and you want to excel and be towards the later play, realize it's a big financial input. If you have expendable capital to do that, that's an easier decision to make. But I think that's an important decision to make earlier.
Yeah, just decide, are you going to invest in the game? Are you free to play? Are you pay to play? Or are you pay to win?
Exactly.
Right?
It's just like if you go to the casino, it's much smarter to say, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to have X amount of dollars to play with, or whether I win or lose. If I double it, I'm done. If I spend it, I'm done. Set those rules up to begin with and be very careful of the impulse buys.
That's really good advice, actually. And man, there are Inchoate, there are many topics that I want to have future conversations with you on. But just to make sure we keep this thing kind of contained, gut feel from you, server mergers, because that's kind of the topic that's running rumors out there. Good thing or bad thing, thumbs up or thumbs down, what's your perspective? And for an average player, out there.
I think from
how do you deal with it?
Personal perspective, I give it a thumb sideways. I don't think it'll have much effect on me, or very high level players. From a mid-level player perspective, I think in the end it's more thumbs down than it is up. I think it'll put some pressure towards players that actually spend to be the ones that remain in the game, and the ones that don't, it will start to shove some of them out due to frustration.
So what's the upside to server mergers? What do you think? What if you wanted to go half glass is half full?
Potentially more competition for an alliance. I mean, is that a necessary thing or a good thing? I mean, to be honest, it's good to win alliance events, even if the rewards are kind of mediocre for a lot of them. But there's a pride thing to it, and a lot of people are in my alliance because they enjoy the game and they enjoy accelerating and they enjoy winning. So that may be more interesting to have more competition, but to be honest, that's the biggest upside I can come up with for you.
So what do you think is going to happen when we look at alliances that are well developed, right? And so we look at Nona as an example, which I love the name of that alliance, but what happens if your server gets merged with a bigger alliance than what you guys have created, right? And that would be a strenuous task. What are you going to do to compete against this suddenly bigger alliance, or somebody who's pretty close to you and doesn't make it easy
like I
for
said,
you to
I think
win
that's
events?
Across that bridge when we come to it kind of thing. It depends what my players want to do. From a personal perspective, it doesn't really change my gameplay whether or not an event is won or lost, because that doesn't affect my resources. My resources come through Amex. So personally, as long as my group of guys is happy, and girls, I'm going to be happy.
Yeah, guys being a non-gender specific term, right? Well, so your insights, and you were on before and had a lot of great feedback about your insights as the level player you are. If you were going to say one thing to, here's somebody who's level 12 or level 15 or level 20, what's it take to be where you're at?
Right.
Right. We're not talking about
that's
money.
what it takes. That's what it takes if you want that level.
Right.
If you want to be a free-to-play player, your ceiling is going to be around the mid-30s. That's what it currently kind of sits at for most players. But that's okay. If you enjoy being a really active, very, good level 24 player, you can enjoy the game that way. It doesn't require you to be top power. You can still work out a lot of these things with officers and how do I play them on this ship, and what, those kind of activities that the game affords you. But you just have to be comfortable with that's what it is. It's not like one of the games where if I sit on it and I farm for 20 hours a day, I'll be the strongest that way. I think that's what part of this game attracts people that are willing to pay money, because a lot of us are professionals and we don't have time to farm 20 hours a day on some of these games where we get outclassed by people who do have that ability. So that's why I think the game is appealing to someone like myself.
So if you were going to go back in time, right, let's talk about 18 months ago, what would you have done differently than you did?
To be honest, I don't know that there are a lot of changes that I would have made. I probably would have changed slightly the way that I leveled up ops level, because as we had previously discussed, the packs that you purchase are better with a higher ops level. So I probably would have maximized that a little bit differently. But in general, I enjoy the way that I've played it thus far, and hopefully I will in the future.
Yeah, me too. So, so let's kind of wrap it up, and I greatly appreciate the time you've taken
It's
out
been a
of your
pleasure.
day to talk with us. Uh, but so I guess on the topic of server merger, leveling up, gameplay style, kind of all wrapped in one, but maybe more focused on what to anticipate in this server merger.
I think
What's your
right now
best
is
advice for
more or
people?
less expect the unexpected. It will get a lot tighter in the mid levels as far as nodes. If they only are basically adding players to exactly what exists, I think that's going to make it more difficult. They have announced that there's going to be some type of event leading up to it. What that entails, we have zero information on, so it's very difficult to make any, to come to any conclusion about how that's going to be. So, like I said, I think it's just expect the unexpected.
That's great advice, and I appreciate your insights into the game, and so does everybody else in Inchoate, Doc. Um, Always a pleasure to speak with you, and Johnny Chainsaw and I are both grateful to have you,
Absolutely. It's been my
join
pleasure
us again, and
always.
we'll have you on in the future. Thank you, sir.